We are talking about your favorite subject and mine, money. And so we're talking about it once again this week. If you weren't with us last weekend did kind of the what behind our money. This weekend, we're going to look at the why behind our money. Next weekend, we're going to look at the actual practical and the how side of our weekend. We started a new series called Different. And I believe with all my heart that Jesus wants us to truly live radically different, graciously different lives, that we have attraction to those in this area who I really honestly are desperately in need and want something different from the church. They want to know that they matter. They want to know that they are welcome. And I firmly believe with all my heart that friends, family, for those who are part of our church, those within your circle of influence truly, deeply desire something different, something better, something more gracious, something with more conviction, something with a little more grit to it, something that will not bend or break under the pressure that they walk in every day, something that they can make sense of the chaos in their day-to-day life, something that is Christ and Christ alone. Jesus is all of those things, and we can get a lot of programs, a lot of things moving, but honestly, it's Jesus and Christ alone is everything that we need. And they need Jesus, but they also need you in the room to be Christ to them. They need your representative to them to live differently, walking around, being Christ-like, living generously to them. And so we at Community, you know this, for those who have been here, you know this, but those who maybe are visiting this morning maybe don't know this, but we at Community believe that it's okay not to be okay. It's okay to come in and not fully have everything together, but we also believe that it's not okay to stay not okay. We believe that it's not okay to just stay there, but we want better for you. And that better is Christ, that better is Him being different. We started our church around those statements, and we said we needed something different, something centered in this community when we started way back in an elementary school with benches and all the hard things that came with setup and tear down every single week of this church. And we said it's something of a church that could be better and different for those in our community who I believe are kind of living that white knuckle faith. And if you don't know what that white knuckle faith is, the white knuckle faith is like, I'm going to work hard, do what I can, morality, good things, good works, and hopefully if I do enough good things, by the end of it, I'll eventually, hopefully, maybe find heaven. And we believe that to those who are in our community who are doing that kind of white knuckle faith, hoping that the best that they have is the best that can get them into heaven, we believe something different. We believe that you can actually have open-handed freedom and not white-knuckle faith here. We believe that you can actually have freedom that is found in Christ alone, who is our salvation, who is our guarantee for heaven to come. And He has called us, because of those things, He's called us to be different. And knowing that He has said that we are to be different, we want you to know that there is freedom available to live that sacrificial, authentic, intentional lives following Him and Him alone. And so the other thing we know about living differently is Christ is all that we need. The other thing that I know about living differently as we start the series, as we're in third week of this series, is that we believe that the church is meant to be you all and not just meant to be staff and pastors who are leading the church. So let me say it this way. A friend of mine says it all the time. He says, we believe that whatever God is going to do, He's going to do through God's people. And that's you. He's going to do it primarily through you. We come to a Sunday morning or we come to community groups and we do the thing. We're part of a group. But honestly, the only way this community gets reached is if you all in this room are living Christ-like in those around you. And you pay us, hopefully, staff and pastors and things like that. Our job is not that you to do all the work. You pay us to coach and equip you to do the work. And you're like, I do? I need to rethink that. I like it better when we pay you to do the work, not we pay you to train us to do the work. That seems like counterproductive. But honestly, that is hopefully the reason that you know that you give is part of the giving that you give here is to equip or is to pay the staff, but ultimately the staff's role is not just to run all the programs and do all the things. The staff's role is to equip you so that you all can do the ministry. That's been from the get-go. The Bible has been clear. The church is about the people of God and the people of God doing the work of ministry. We believe with all of our heart that whatever God is going to do, he's going to do in and through you, God's people. And if you are here and you say, man, I don't know that I'm equipped, or I don't know that the staff is built into me like that, please ask. We would love to, if we've missed that along the way, we want to make that right. Because our job, our role is to equip you to live differently. A good friend like this, the job of the church, or the job of actually the staff, elders, the job of the staff and the elders is this: the leadership's job is to celebrate, serve, and encourage and equip you to do the work of ministry. And so our goal over these last couple years, it would be doing that, and our goal intentionally moving forward is that we would equip you all to do the work of ministry and do it in your realms of influence and do it well. And part of that equipping is we've been through evangelism training earlier this year, or a couple weeks back in April. We looked at My Circle, and you get equipping through the preaching and teaching of God's Word. You get equipping through community groups and things like that. But ultimately, the goal is that we were equipping you to live lives that are different, live lives that are intentional, live lives that are meaningful to those that are around you. That's the goal. And so I hope these few short weeks, as we talk about living differently, I hope that you understand that it's not just like, yeah, we should do that, but hopefully you understand that our heart is to equip you to do it. Not just to do it, but equip you to do it. Equip you to do the work of ministry to those who are around you. And one of the ways that we're going to talk about equipping is how we handle our finances, and we looked at that last week. And so last week we said living differently. We said that money always starts with a mindset. We talked about the idea that our finances, we often think of practice first, but ultimately money really starts with a mindset first. And then we also, last week, money always tells a story. And it'll tell a story that is positive, it'll tell a story that is negative, but ultimately, your money tells a story. And you really get to decide what story tells. A lot of us are like, no, my money tells me what to do. I'm sorry. That's not the way it's supposed to work. You tell your money what to do, and you get your money the story that you want it to tell. We said that unfortunately, we have an obstacle to living out a good mindset and a good story. And that obstacle is greed. And we talked about last week that greed is assuming that it's all mine for my consuming. And if you need more on that, I won't hit a lot of that from last weekend. You can look at that last week. So this weekend, if last weekend was the greed, this weekend we want to look at the cure for greed. And this weekend, the cure for greed is what we're going to look in 2 Corinthians chapter 8. If you have your Bibles, you go ahead and turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 8. Again, if you do not have a Bible, there are some in the lobby. They are black. They look like this. They're right underneath the Loving Our Neighbors to Life logo down over there. You can grab one of those on the way out. But if not, it will be on the screen for you as well. But before we get into that, or as you're turning to 2 Corinthians 8, let me give you some backdrop to 2 Corinthians chapter 8. The backdrop to this story: Paul, who was called by God to reach a people group that he was sworn to be natural enemies with. He wanted nothing to do with the group of people God would call him to. But in Acts chapter 9, we read that there was a miraculous conversion of a guy named Saul, who eventually gets named Paul. And this miraculous conversion happens, and he turns his life over to Jesus. And as he turns his life over to Jesus, we read in Acts chapter 10, he begins a full-fledged campaign to reach a non-Jewish people. And as a result, many people come to know Christ through Paul's ministry. And among those were a group of people who were Gentiles, who that means simply they were not Jewish born. They were not a bloodline of the Jewish race. And so they converted to Judaism. These Gentiles would convert to Judaism, and they were called Hellenistic Jews. And so if you see this term in Scripture, the Hellenistic Jews, they were those who were not naturally born Jewish. They would be you and I, unless you're of Jewish origin. And they converted over to Judaism. And it was kind of like the step one, but what we're missing was Jesus. And so they would follow the laws and the rules of Judaism as Gentiles, but they wouldn't be fully accepted. And then eventually, Paul's like, you need to know that it's Christ. You need to know that it's Jesus and Jesus alone. And so, anyway, that's his ministry that he has. And these Hellenistic Jews, they were this non-Jewish race that converted to become a Jew, but did not receive Jesus. So there were those called Peter and Barabbas, and then Paul went to start churches all around the area to these people. And so in Acts chapter 11, verses 20 to 26, let me just kind of read backdrop, second chapter 8. But there were some of them, men of Cyprus and Cyrene, who on coming to Antioch spoke to the Hellenistics, also preaching the Lord Jesus. And the hand of the Lord was with them, and a great number who believed turned to the Lord. The report of this came to the ears of the church in Jerusalem, and so they sent Barnabas to Antioch. So the first missionary sent to these people was Barnabas. Barnabas was a strong encourager. He was a guy you just loved to be around. He was that guy that was all encouraging. Like if you met him in church, you're like, I just like that dude. I don't know why. Like he's just always good. He's always kind. Barnabas was that guy. And Barnabas went to Antioch. And when he came and saw the grace of God, I love that. Keep that in mind. He was glad. And he exhorted them all to remain faithful to the Lord with steadfast purpose. For he was a good man, full of the Holy Spirit and of faith. And a great many people were added to the Lord. So Barnabas went to Tarsus to look for Saul. Now, Saul, there's a reason why he was in Tarsus. We won't get into that. But Barnabas goes and gets Saul, Paul, and when he found him, he brought him to Antioch. And for a whole year, they met with the church and taught a great many people. And in Antioch, the disciples were first called Christians. So the word Christian, you don't get that until Acts chapter 11. And the first time they're called Christians is part of this Hellenistic Jew, this whole campaign, this year of planting churches in Antioch. And Barnabas and Paul are part of this whole story. I promise this plays in 2 Corinthians chapter 8. So in chapter 11 then of Acts 11, the story continues. They plant this church. They're there for a year. They're ministering to these people. The news goes back to Jerusalem. This is a good thing. We're seeing people come to Jesus. Acts 11, 27 to 30. Now in these days, prophets came down from Jerusalem to Antioch, and one of them named Agabus stood up and foretold by the Spirit that there would be a great famine all over the world, and this took place in the days of Claudius. So the disciples determined, everyone according to his ability, and relief to the brothers living in Judea, and they did so, sending it to the elders by the hand of Barnabas and Saul. So there's this huge need that comes up all over Jerusalem for the poor. And so they decide, hey, let's use Paul and Barnabas to do this campaign tour around all these new churches, and we're going to raise funds. It's going to be a campaign. We're going to raise all this money to reach and help the poor out. And so every church that they planted, they would send a delegate to that church and say, hey, we need you to be aware of a need. And that need is we need you to help us raise funds that are going to go out to the poor in Jerusalem. And so Paul has had this conversation with the Corinthian church earlier, and the Corinthian church was like, yes, we want to do that. And so Paul is reminding now the Corinthian church of that investment to raise money for the poor. Does that make sense? Tracking with me so far? Okay, so that's where the background is. It's a lot of background to get there, but here we go into 2 Corinthians chapter 8, beginning verse 1 through verse 4. I love this. We want you to know, brothers, about the grace of God that has been given among the churches of Macedonia. For in severe test of affliction, their abundance of joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed wealth of generosity on, key pronoun here, on their part. For they gave according to their means, as I can testify, and beyond of their own accord, begging us earnestly for the favor of taking part in the relief of the saints. So to the Corinthian church, he said, hey, we're going to raise money for the poor. They're like, yeah, we're in. Let's do it. This other church in Macedonia, this very poor church, heard about this request and literally begged Paul, hey, could we please send you money to help with the poor that you're collecting for? We desperately, desperately want to send you. Now, if you're reading this story, there's a couple things just in verse 1 and verse 2 that make no sense to me whatsoever. They don't make practical sense as you read verse 1 and 2. We want you, brothers, to know about the grace of God that has been given among the churches of Macedonia. First off, he says the grace that has been given to the churches of Macedonia. He doesn't say the dollars that have been given from the church of Macedonia. He says the grace that was given from the churches in Macedonia. But then he says this, for in a severe test of affliction, their abundance of joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part. Here's the things that don't go together. Severe affliction, extreme poverty equals what? Abundant joy. Now, I don't know if you're there or not, but if you've ever been through severe affliction and you've been through just terrible, terrible things in your life of extreme poverty, typically you're not thinking, man, I'm so happy. I'm so happy that life is severe afflictions and I'm broke poor. Like, that doesn't translate in this culture. Typically, when you hear severe affliction and poverty, you typically think the most bitter, manipulative people in our culture who are just trying to get theirs, right? You don't think abundant joy. But I can tell you, time and time again, when you go to countries and cultures that are under severe affliction and extreme poverty, you walk among them and there is extreme joy. Because why? As one missionary said when we went to the country that she was attending, she says, why is it that you have all this joy when this is all you see is affliction and poverty? And they said, in the United States, you have Jesus plus everything else. Here we only have Jesus. And it was a clear statement. And it's a clear reality that this Macedonian church in severe affliction and extreme poverty equaled abundance of joy, overflowing in a wealth of generosity on their part. Not only were they broke and they were afflicted and terrified to just go outside their homes at times, they decided in the middle of this they wanted to give. And they wanted to give sacrificially to the poor. The irony in this story, this Macedonian church wants to give to the poor. To which if we were to see that church, we'd be like, hey guys, quick secret, you are the poor. You are the poor. We should be getting funds for you, not you sending funds to us. And yet in their joy, don't miss this, in their joy, because of Jesus, they said, no, we're not poor, we're rich, and we're going to give it all away. I don't know if you've been around those kind of people or not, but you need to get around those kind of people who have just nothing left and they're still just giving every single ounce that they have. This was the Macedonian church. In that Greco-Roman world, 73% of the people lived below the minimum standard, think hand to mouth. 15% were relatively poor, and only about 7% were moderately successful, and only about 5% of the Greco-Roman world were very wealthy. And these would have been in the not only lower 73rd, but even below that. And yet they decided to give. I love this. Verse 3, they gave according to means, beyond their means, by their own decision. This is crazy. For they gave according to their means, as I can testify, and beyond their means, and of their own accord. In other words, they gave what they had, they gave sacrificially beyond what they had, and they did it on their own decision. It was their choice. It was their choice to this to Paul. And I love this, that this church is the beginning of what would be more funds given directly over. I love this about Community Bible Church too, is there have been seasons for many of you here where you have harder times financially, and you've had harder times making things work. And a lot of things that have come into your life were not planned, and yet you decided, you know what, we're still going to give sacrificially. And we have seen it over the last 8, 9 years as a church. We have seen time and time again you all be faithful to the giving to this church. Beginning in the very beginning of this church, where we didn't know where we were going to go, what we were going to do, how we were going to make it, and yet every single time God has provided for our needs. I think in the 8 to 9 years that we have been here as a church, I think there's only been 1 year that we were kind of like, and it wasn't even COVID year. You guys have done the generous things, and I say thank you for it. But this church was the example to the Corinthian church of giving beyond their means. They gave so much, in fact, verse 4, they were begging us earnestly for the favor of taking part in the relief of the saints. Crazy. And then we get to verse 5, and this is amazing. I love verse 5 as we get into this text. Verse 5 says, and this, not as we expected, but they gave themselves first to the Lord, and then by the will of God to us. Here's the key with generosity. Here's the key with money. This is your key verse today for any kind of money, any kind of bank account, any kind of 401k. This is your verse. And this, not as we expected, this is your key, but they gave themselves first to the Lord and then by the will of God to us. It wasn't that they said, okay, guys, what's in the bank account? What can we give? They first went to the Lord and said, God, what do you want us to do? How do you want us to spend your money? How do you want us to invest your funds? Not our own, yours. Why? Here's the question as a church. Why do we have so much? Now, I just told you it's the most poor church around. Poverty was extreme. Of money, let's give it away. And you had to believe that there was somebody in that church who was the dollars and cents guys who were there around that room going like, guys, I don't know. I mean, we should be accepting funds, not giving funds. And yet, around the table, they prayed and said, you know what? Money is a mindset, and the mindset we're taking in this is, why do we have so much? Why do we have so much extra? Let's give it away. Let's give it to the poor that need it more than we do. It was a mental shift. And here's the thing this morning, and here's a couple keys. Greed will always ask you, why don't I have so much? Greed will always ask you, why don't I have something? Generosity will always ask, why do I have so much? Why am I so blessed? Why do I have the extras? Why do I have all of this? Generous people will ask, why do I have so much? You see, when we first got married, we lived in kind of a rough part of Canton-ish. One of our favorite things to do from our upstairs window was watch drug deals happen in the parking lot below. It was a lot of fun. And so that was just part of where we were. And part of the job that I accepted for the first time coming out of ministry, you know, you graduate Moody Bible Institute, and you're like, man, I'm going to be making it. I'm going to make it as a youth pastor. My money is going to be awesome. That's not true. And so we decided to take the first job, and it was down in Canton. And this first job came with a house. It was called a parsonage at that point. And when I say house, it was generous. It was a house. It had floors. It had rooms. Some floors you couldn't go into on the second story, but it was a floor. The toilet on the upstairs bathroom kind of went like this every time you sat on it. Never knew how to fix it, so it just was that way until we left it. And at one point, we had friends over, and the ceiling in the dining room starts to kind of get wet. We're like, that looks wet. And then all of a sudden, water starts coming through. We're like, get out of the shower! Whole thing, like we didn't know what was happening next with this house. But that was where we were. And in that time, we had this house that was part of the pay, but as a youth pastor, I was taking home a whopping $18,000 a year. And I was like, man, I am making it. I am living the dream, right? $18,000 a year, let's go. And my poor wife was like, I don't know what I married into. I mean, this is the first couple of years of our marriage. And yet, I can tell you, during those times, even though our bank account was not all that we needed, we knew that we had to come in with a mindset, and the mindset was, what do we do with all that we have? And you would look at that and you'd say, man, 18 grand and a house that's falling apart, that eventually that house actually went away because of termites. But that's another story. It was so bad they had to tear it down. But that's where we lived. And it was this amazing place. But we said, how do we still be generous with what we have? It was a mindset. Why do we have so much? And during that time, we were able to not only give back to the church, we were also give to friends of ours out on the mission field, and we were specifically thinking, man, why do we have so much? When really, we didn't have much at all. And so we decided early on that money was going to be a mindset, and these people knew that money was a mindset. Because here's the rule when it comes to money. Greed will always thrive in tight times. Always. Greed will be the first thing you feel when money gets tight. It's mine, it's all mine to consume, and so I need to protect it. Greed thrives in tight times. Survival breeds greed. When you have extra, when there's margin in your life, it will breed generosity. And so we learned early on, you probably already know this, but those who don't know this, we learned practically one thing, and that practical one thing was this. You have to choose early on with your finances how much of a percentage of your income you want to live on. Do you want to live on 100% of your income? Do you want to live on 110% of your income? Do you want to live on 130% of your income? The math doesn't work, just so you're tracking with me. Or do you want to live on 60% of your income, 80% of your income? What percentage of your income do you want to live on? And that rule was so influential to us, even with $18,000 in a dilapidated house. We said, what percentage do we want to live on? And when we said we want to live on 80% of our income, it was tight. It was very tight. But we also knew that living on 80% of our income allowed us for 20% of that income to be given away, or 10% of that income to be given away, 5% of that income to be given away. I don't know what that is, but typically when it comes to greed and generosity, generosity will only flow when there is margin in your life. And you only get margin in your life when you look at your finances and say, how much do we want to live on? How much do we want to live on? Because if it's 110% and you're living on 110%, you're going to constantly feel the pressure and stress. If you're living on 95% of your income, that's a start. But what that 5% is either, you got to figure out where that goes. We're going to look at that more next week in the practical house. But you're already living on a percentage of your income. You already are. If the question is, are you living on a percentage of your income accidentally or on purpose? And that's what our finances tell us all the time. It's choosing to live on purpose. And here's the deal. When it comes to our money and generosity, again, it's not the amount, it's the mindset. Generosity is the medication to protect you from greed. Generosity is what you practice to keep greed outside. Generosity has a few parts to it. Showing mercy, a feeling of full or lavish. Or to put it this way, last week we said that fear is the fuel for greed, and we said that trust is the fuel for contentment. This week, the thing is this: grace is the fuel for generosity. To put it another way, you could say joy that the Macedonian churches had was the fuel for generosity. And the reason I say grace is it's found in the rest of this text. This is fascinating. Look at Paul's mindset in these two chapters, chapters 8 and chapter 9. In chapter 8 and chapter 9, in 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and 9, Paul never gives us a dollar amount. Do you ever notice that? He doesn't tell us how much the Macedonians gave. He doesn't tell how the Corinthians gave. Here's what he does give us. He gives us language in chapters 8 and 9 that do not make any sense financially. Let me give you some words that he uses in chapters 8 and 9, and that he uses a lot of them. Instead of money and bank account, we hear words in chapters 8 and 9 like grace, privilege, partnership, sharing, service, earnestness, love, willingness, generosity. He continues on to the next group of words. He goes into abundance, liberal gift, undertaking, blessing, good work, the yield of your righteousness, service. Do you see the relational thing that Paul is building here? He's not giving you financial wisdom, saying, here's your dollars and cents. He goes with generosity is all of these words. Generosity is service. Generosity is earnestness. Generosity is love, willingness, abundance, liberal gift, blessing, yield of your righteousness, service. It's showing you that it's a mindset throughout all of these things. He continues. Not only does he say it's not about all the bank account money, it's about the actual part of your mindset in this. He goes into verses 6 and 7. Accordingly, I love this, verses 6 and 7. We urge Titus that as he had started, so he should complete among you this act of what? Grace. Not this act of collecting all your money and give it to us. Give it to me now. Give it. Pass the plate. Let's pass the plate again. We didn't get quite enough, right? He goes, this is an act of grace. But as you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in all earnestness, and our love for you, see that you excel in this act of grace also. One of our elders early on would always tell me, we talk about discipleship as a church, and discipleship in our reading of the Bible, discipleship in our prayer life, discipleship and accountability and confessing our sins. But he says, often we forget that discipleship is also our finances. And our discipleship is part of our finances based off of this verse. He says, as you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in earnestness, in love, see that you excel in this act of generosity as well. It's not just discipleship as my study of the word and things like that. It is bigger than that. It is actually involving generosity as well. There's a better why, and the why is grace. I love this. He continues in verse 10 and 12. And in this matter, I give my judgment. This benefits you, who a year ago started not only to do this work, but also to desire to do it. He's talking to the Corinthian church here. He says, you Corinthian church, you decided to give this money to the poor a year ago, not only to do this work, but also to desire to do it. So now finish doing it as well, so that your readiness is desiring it. So that your readiness in desiring it may be matched by your completing it out of what you have. For the readiness is there. It is acceptable according to what a person has, not according to what he does not have. Paul's like, hey, I know that you talked a good game, and your motives are good that you want to give. Start doing it. I know that your motives are pure, and you really felt like this is something you wanted to give to this campaign, so start giving it. And so he says your actions have to match your desires to them in verses 10 and 12. It's not just your motives when it comes to your finances. It's not just saying, man, I really want to be generous. You're right. You're going to leave here this morning. Joel, you're right. I want to be generous. Absolutely. That's a great idea. We're going to get on that. When? When will you be more generous? Well, when we got a little bit more margin, when they're a little bit better, we're going to start to get a little more generous. Can I encourage you? It's not about a bank account. It's not about passing a plate today. I'm just saying, when? Because it's not just a motive of being generous. It's the act of being generous. Verses 13 to 15. For I do not mean that others should be eased and you burdened, but that as a matter of fairness, your abundance at the present time should supply their need, so that in their abundance may supply your need, that there may be fairness. Verse 15, as it is written, whoever gathered much had nothing left over, and whoever gathered little had no lack. If you know your Bible, he's going back to Exodus. He talks about manna when it came from heaven and on the ground, and people were gathering just as much as they needed. And some had families of large families, some had smaller families, some were individuals, some were older, some were younger. And it said that whenever that family went out and gathered food, they all had exactly what they needed for their family. And when people tried to get excess, if you remember the story, they woke up in the morning and there was a bunch of maggots in their bread. Now, I don't know about you. That's kind of proof of like, maybe we overdid it. Maybe we shouldn't have grabbed that much bread. But the thing is, he's saying the point was not the bread. The point was God supplied as they had need. And so Paul is telling the Corinthian church, hey, I'm not telling you to outdo the Macedonians. I'm not telling you to give beyond what you need to. I'm just saying you have it, so give it, because the Macedonians had it and gave it as well. Paul did not pull any punches when it came to finances and generosity. He was very clear. And the question he was asking the Corinthian church that he would ask us today is not why don't I have so much, but generosity, again, begins with the question of why do I have so much? And what do I want to do with that? So this morning, as we think of generosity, generosity is truly that mindset of why do I have it, and what does God want me to do with it? And generosity is always beginning in a mindset, and it always begins, I love this, in the idea of grace. You'll see in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, he not only talks about financial giving, but he talks about in verse 9 of 2 Corinthians chapter 8, for you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you by his poverty might become rich. You see, grace always fuels generosity. Grace is that undeserved, unmerited favor of why has he given me so much in my life? And that question of why has he given me so much then moves into the next part, and that is, what do I do with it? You can put down your notes for this last section as we wrap up. I just want to speak directly to you this morning. And so there won't be many notes to take here as we wrap up. I just want to share just a couple things with you as we wrap up. When we talk about generosity and finances, I never want to be accused of the bait and switch pastor, right? All right, it's talking about generosity. The plate's coming, okay? I get it. And he's going to keep asking. I know that's what churches do. And so I don't ever want to be that bait and switch pastor, but I always want to be authentic and clear about the motives behind why we do this. And so I will be clear and honest that the motive behind one of the reasons we chose money as a thing that we wanted to talk about in the different series was because we realized we're going to be coming up on a season, Lord willing, as a church where money is going to be very important to talk about. Not only money for making operations and things happen, which I'll just be authentic and really honest here, we are good. We are good as a church. Like, you have given sacrificially. We're not pulling more money from you today. We've been able to meet budget. We've been able to be over budget some years, over budget in places where you've been here, where we've met budget early, and we've told you, hey, this Sunday, all the money we're collecting this Sunday is going to go out. We're not going to see a dime of whatever comes in this Sunday. It's all going to be spent on somebody else. We want to be a generous church. And so we are really good. I'm just saying, when we get to money, we are going to be moving into a campaign mode here down the road as we look towards a building. And that comes with money. And so we wanted to have a conversation about money. And so I don't want you to kind of think like, oh, here we go. I knew it. They want my money. Yeah, we do. But not right now, and not even this month. I'm just saying we need to start thinking through this idea of generosity, because let me share where we are within this whole idea of a building and all that kind of stuff. One, we've met multiple times with a company, and they're designing a floor plan for us. And we're on round 3 of the floor plan design. And I think we're really close to what we want it to be and look like. And there's a team that's been put together, and we work towards that end. And we're seeing it all come together. We're going to eventually be able to show you guys an outside rendering of the building on the property, where it sits on the property, all that kind of stuff. And so as we look towards the building, those things are happening in the background. A lot of people have been asking, like, what are you doing? Where are we at with the building? The land's just sitting. And we've been very clear that when we know, we'll let you know, but when we don't know, we're not going to try and confuse you about what we don't know. We're going to just be clear on what we know. So here's what we know. We know that we're in that phase of the floor plans are getting developed. It's matching what we want it to match. We're looking at a sanctuary of like 378 versus 90, 100. And so it'll be a place that we can really see God using us in the future. But the floor plan design is there. We're going to be starting to look at that. And then once we get there, we're going to start looking at a campaign and how do we look at all the finances that go with that. Now, I don't have a clue as far as what to tell you right now as far as finance goes. We are in that process. We are talking to the right people and putting financial projections out and all that kind of good stuff. We'll get there. I just want to be clear that when we talk about money, it's not a bait and switch, but it's a clear reality of we will need you to be generous if we desire to go and see God move in us in that direction of this building. Financial projections are being calculated, and before we move on financials, we will have more meetings with you as members about what needs voted on, what doesn't, all that kind of stuff. But we are really, really excited for what God is going to do. When we saw the floor plans and the building and things like that, we're like, oh my gosh, this could be the place that could reach this community for generations and generations to come. We were convicted when we were looking at this whole thing, and I'll just share this as our elder board. We were convicted because we had often talked about the wrong kind of why when we talk about a building. Because we had been convinced that the why would be getting us all into one service. And then we realized that's a really bad why. It's not a terrible why. It's just not the best why. The real reason that we needed to do this, the real reason that we want to do this is so that there is a long-lasting impact on those who are far from Jesus in this community for generations to come. And what you're building is not just a building, it is a tool and a resource to be a launching point in this area, in that location, a perfect location right in between here and there and Tesla. It's an exact middle location so that we would be a place that could be used by the community to reach the community and not just to gain a bigger place to have a service in. Does that make sense? When I first planted, and this is going long, I apologize, but you need to hear this. So when I first planted, I had conversations with some elders in the church before we even opened our doors. And I went around the community and I tried to meet with every pastor in the area. And it went okay. Most of them were like, yeah, that's great for you, but cool. It wasn't really a warm reception, I'll just put it that way, from pastors. And I remember specifically I had a lunch with one of them, and his words to me exactly were, we don't need another Sunday morning around here. And I thought, one, I was offended. But secondly, I was like thinking about it, I'm like, you are absolutely right. You are absolutely right. We do not need just another Sunday morning around here. We need every member of Community Bible Church equipped to do the work of ministry. That's what we need. Sunday mornings are a plus. Sunday mornings are a benefit. Sunday mornings are like icing on the cake. But Sunday mornings, you are exactly right. We don't need another service. We need disciple makers launched into a community. That's what we need. And so this becomes that place where we can do that. And so I just want to share our heart in that. And we talk about generosity. There is a reason behind it. We want to be always authentic and to say that when we think of generosity, it is always best to be authentic and clear about it. With that being said, we're not passing a funding plate around today. Instead, I want you to see God's heart and generosity as uses Paul to convey it. Generosity is far more expansive than your bank account. And as we look ahead to what God has for us at Community, I was reminded of a few things. One, Butch Pursley, who was with us as an elder early on, always said these words, "Where God leads, God provides." And I thought, that's a great slogan, but really, come on. And I started to doubt that early on. Even when we planted the church and things were a little shaky, Butch would always say, where God leads, God provides. And I can tell you, this week alone, just as an encouragement, this week alone, I've heard 2 stories just this week from 2 different places of 2 different organizations. One is a church, another one's something else I can't share. But these 2 organizations I heard this week specifically, God supplied needs financially for them. One around $5 million just given, the other around $6 million just given. And both came through people that were not associated with the church. And I thought, man, that's incredible. And one, can I get their number? Secondly, I thought, where God leads, God provides. And their faith was shaky. And I could tell you, both those guys I talked to, when they were meeting in that room where millions of dollars were on the table, they were like, there's no way. There's no way. And God provided. Because where God leads, God provides. And we want you to know that God is the one who supplies all of these things. I was reminded of how God provided for Grace Church in Nepal when we were there, and he made a phone call, and within 24 hours, the church had $25,000 to finish the top level of their place that they were going to raise pastors and support pastors in. I was reminded of how we've been faithful through all the sacrificial gifts here at this place that have met every single need that we have had. I was reminded that how we as a church have had multiple Sundays, as I said before, that we gave money away. I told Carrie this week, as I was thinking about this idea of generosity and what God has for us, here's what I was thinking. I told Carrie, I said, I have no idea how God's going to provide for us, but I'm going to be really excited to be able to share what that story is. And you're going to be really excited to share what that story is. And you're both going to be like, you are not going to believe this. And I'm going to be like, I think you're lying. But God always meets our needs. And I just wanted you to know, as we talk about generosity, yes, it's important. Yes, we have a direction in mind. Yes, you're going to hear more about it. But ultimately, we are generous because God has been generous to us. We talk about generosity because God owns everything, and he has been super generous to Community Bible Church. Most churches don't make it 5 years as church plants. We are almost into year 9. And God has continued to be faithful every single year. And I appreciate you all and what you've done to that end. So as we close, would you please stand with us? I'm going to bring Rich and the team up. And I just want to pray specifically for us as a church. And I want to pray specifically for you. I don't know what today looks like for you. Like, I don't know if you came in today and your extra is great and you're comfortable, or if you came in today and you're like, Joel, we are in a season where finances are not something fun that we like to talk about. It doesn't matter how you come in this morning. The reality is this: God has it all, and God has everything that we truly need. And we are not a name it and claim it church. It is not a, you just need to ask and God will give you that $1 million. That's not what we do. We say Christ is enough for all that we need. And we want us to be a church that is not Christ and all the stuff, but Christ and Christ alone is our stuff. And only he is what we need. And so we're going to sing this song out. We taught it to you last week. We're going to finish with this week as a reminder of the promise that we seek first him, we seek first his kingdom, and then the rest is added. We don't come in saying, God, give us all the money we need. We come in saying, give me you. Let me be part of your kingdom work. You will supply. Make sense? We'll sing this out together and we'll close.